That was a little showreel of sample footage I made with the Nikon ZR, edited with a bit of a Kodak Vision 35mm film inspired look using DaVinci Resolve. This was a fairly simple grading process that I'll share later in the video. But before that, thanks for joining and welcome if you're new here. My name's Hashem and this is my channel Pushing Film. I borrowed the new ZR from Nikon Australia for a couple of weeks and shot all the footage that you're seeing handheld using various lenses. I used the Thypox Samara C for about 80% of the clips and a few other lenses that I'll point out or put on the screen throughout the video. I didn't use a gimbal or rig the camera up for any of this and shot various video formats to get a feel for how the files would handle coming out of this camera. I also tested it out for still shooting and generally put it through its paces to see if it would suit me and my creative process. And in case you don't know, I'm a freelance photographer who is heavily into analog film, especially for my personal photography work. But I also create videos for clients and, of course, for here on YouTube. This was another situation where I was the one who reached out to Nikon and asked to try out the camera, much like the Nikon ZF when that first launched. So here's what drew me to the ZR. To put it simply, the capability at this price point. This is a powerhouse of a little full-frame cine camera with a massive screen, 32-bit float audio built in, red raw recording, built-in stabilization, no overheating, all for 3,500 Australian dollars or about 2,200 US dollars. I wanted to test it out to find out if I should get one myself. And by the end of the video, you'll know my thoughts on that. But going back to the montage and the film-inspired color grade, this was simply my way of figuring out how good does the video look coming out of this camera, and almost as importantly, how easy are the files to work with if you shoot N-Log or RAW footage. I do all my video editing in DaVinci Resolve Studio, and for all of these clips, I tried to keep the process as straightforward as possible. I used a single or two-node grading setup, mostly comprising the film look creator in Resolve. Here I applied a color space override from whatever format I was shooting to Rec 709, which did 80% of the work, to be honest. And then I made a bunch of adjustments to get the clips where I wanted in that creative sense of things. I also used some screenshots from favorite movies shot on film, for example, like Pulp Fiction, and used the reference wipe feature to get a general sense of the direction I wanted to go with things like color, contrast, exposure, and detail. Sometimes I made a couple of tweaks in the second node, but that was pretty much it. With this kind of grading, it's a lot simpler than using multiple nodes that I'd sometimes do myself if I want more fine control and the ability to use that grade across more clips. But I generally try and keep things as simple as possible. I'm not a color grading expert by any means, so me sharing this as a download wouldn't really be of any use to you because it's very dependent on your specific footage, the lens you've used, how you expose, all that kind of stuff. And it would need to be tweaked from clip to clip. But if you do want a further breakdown of my process of grading in Resolve, let me know and I can consider doing that as a separate video, maybe on my second channel. As mentioned, I mostly use the Thypox Samara C 35mm, which worked beautifully on this camera. You can input the focal length of any non-CPU lenses used on the ZR, like many Z cameras, to help the stabilization work correctly, which is great. I adapted this using the Thypox M to Z positive lock adapter, which works beautifully and gives a solid, secure fit, especially when you start to use heavier lenses, if you do tend to use heavier cine lenses than the one I did. This meant I was also able to use other M lenses like my non-cine version of the Samara 75. I also really enjoyed using lenses like the Nikon Z50 1.8S and the 24-70 f2.8. These were naturally sharper than the cine lens and had the benefit of autofocus and other modern features built in. And in those cases, the autofocus worked perfectly, including the great tracking features, be it for faces, birds, or whatever option you might choose from. And that's the beauty of the Z mount. As I've mentioned in other videos, because of that short flange distance, you can adapt lenses from almost any other mount. And unlike my Canon R system, I don't get any of that pinkish purple vignetting and artifacts, especially when adapting wider lenses from the M mount. As you've been seeing on the screen, I shot a mixture of the H.265 footage in N-Log and using Red RAW. This was usually at 4K, maybe 5K with a few clips, and at 50 or 25 frames per second. I used my Earth variable ND filter where necessary and a Tiffin Pro Mist 1/8 on some of the clips. Now, when it comes to the red RAW footage, is it worth shooting in this format? The file sizes get pretty huge and you might need more computer power to handle them well. Coming from the point of view of an enthusiast or prosumer level videographer, there is a noticeable difference in color depth and dynamic range when shooting in red. But to be honest, the 10-bit N-Log footage is more than good enough for most things that I currently shoot. Of course, it's nice to know the camera has all that capability in there, and I still feel like I barely exercised it to its full potential. The files were easy enough to grade and included their own proxies. But as mentioned, they are much heavier files and might be overkill for many. But all this means is that you have choices and plenty of room to grow, all in this one little camera. Going over some of the other features of the ZR. It records 32-bit float audio even without an external mic. This is actually pretty good quality and it's directional recording, which has plenty of room to adjust in post in situations where you might normally clip on other cameras. This will work for external mics through the hot shoe or using a 3.5mm jack. You have a CF card Type B as the main and a micro SD as a secondary card slot, or maybe as a backup option. It has micro HDMI if you do want to use an external screen, but with that 4-inch built-in screen, this becomes even less necessary. Much of the camera controls are done through the screen, and they've included a great interface for important video shortcuts, and then you have your regular quick menu in the other corner for regular quick menu type items. So with all that screen real estate, it really adds to the user experience. One thing I quite liked is the physical switch on the top to switch between photo and video. So how is the ZR for stills? Well, it works as you'd imagine considering it's a full-frame Z camera, but with a few caveats. There's no viewfinder, so that's the big thing. It might be a deal breaker for some. It just really depends how you shoot. And also it's an electronic shutter only, so the 1/60th flash sync speed wouldn't be great if you plan to use it in the studio with strobes. But I don't think many people will be doing that with the ZR. What it does work well for is for everyday shooting and things like travel or street photography. The 24 megapixels might not be enough for professionals doing commercial shoots, but it's plenty for the vast majority of photographic purposes. The screen gives you heaps of real estate to compose with, it's nice and bright, and you have all the regular picture control features of other Z cameras. I'm also secretly hoping that maybe Nikon will add the film grain feature from the ZF that they launched recently to some of the other cameras, including the ZR, but who knows. From the few stills I took with the ZR, I applied my custom picture control recipe and some grain in Nikon NX Studio, which worked great. If you want to try the recipe, it's available on my blog for free, which is linked below. The files also work and edit well in Lightroom as long as you've updated to a new enough version to read the ZR RAW files. So with a little pancake lens, like maybe the 40mm f2 or something, this camera can become like a full frame version of something like a Ricoh GR. With everything I've covered so far and the quality of the video and photos I was able to create, will I be getting a Nikon ZR myself? I think I will. I really loved using it and it's way more capable for video than the Canon R6 I currently use, while costing much less than the newer versions of that, like the Mark II or III. Just the fact that it doesn't overheat is enough for me. My R6 will often overheat while recording talking head videos like this. In fact, it did it during recording this video, so I had to take a bit of a break and let the camera cool down. And that can get really frustrating. It restricts what I can use it for when it comes to client work, which is usually fine if it's short clips, but then things like interviews and long weddings and whatever become out of the question. Other options with similar capability as the ZR are either substantially more expensive and then sometimes need a fan built in to keep cool, costing size and portability. The ZR lets you use it as a simple run and gun style system or completely rig it out into an extremely capable cine camera setup. You can adapt lenses from many other mounts and there's a growing number of great Z mount options being released all the time. As someone who primarily shoots my personal photography work on film, this would make a perfect companion for content creation and travel photography and video. And then it's also an entire cine camera that fits in the palm of my hand for more professional work when I want that. So those are my thoughts on the new ZR. For whatever criticisms there might be, like the viewfinder or the card slots or whatever, it's really easy to overlook that considering this price. It really is quite a deal that isn't matched at the moment. But as usual, let me know your thoughts. Are you also thinking of getting one? Or if you already have one, what's been your experience? Thanks for staying all the way until the end, and thank you to Nikon Australia for saying yes after I reached out to collaborate once again. I'll see you next time.